Thank you very much, Gail, and how a pleasure to be invited to speak to you today. I'm looking forward to the questions at the end, but let's get started. Systematic reviews and how you can get involved. I'll be asking Veronica to move the slides as we go through, so when you hear me say thanks, it's to ask her to move on the slides. Veronica and I both work at University of Cambridge Medical Library. We've both been teaching and being involved as co-authors of systematic reviews for a number of years now. And so we hope that we can give you some insight into the process. But as I say, I look forward to your questions at the end. Thanks. So what this session will cover is, if you want to go through them all, just why they're needed, what exactly systematic reviews are, who contributes to them, what the PPI contribution might be, and a few hands-on activities, because we like to keep you on your toes. But of course, any other questions that you've got as we go along, as was mentioned, put them in the chat, but we'll look forward to the Q&A at the end of the session if there's other things that are on your mind. Thank you. So this is one of the reasons why we need systematic reviews, because don't you love, we may not all read the Mail online, but don't you love contrasting headlines and contradictory headlines about what will kill us or cure us in equal measure? Thank you. So all things can be evidenced as being good for us or bad for us, effective or ineffective in equal measure. And just this wealth and the variety of information that's out there, the number of studies that evidence in contradictory ways can be somewhat bamboozling. And that's even if you're reading the academic literature. If you're only reading the synthesis that arrives in the newspaper, it can be even more bamboozling and confusing, and for the clinicians, far less members of the public. So why we need systematic reviews is because there's so much information out there, and because it can sometimes be contradictory or evidencing to different levels of strength. Thank you. We cope with this by, well, we could individually try and read and evaluate every single research article on a particular topic, because we've all got all the time in the world. It's not really practical, is it? It's not everybody's got time for it, and not everybody's got access to all the information that's out there on a particular topic, and even finding it is difficult. So therefore, we need a single piece of research that finds a question, pulls together all the relevant studies on that particular topic, that is then synthesized, and that is a systematic review. So rather than reading 50, 100, however many papers on a particular topic, you can read one article that pulls together all of the evidence that tries to answer that question and comes up with, hopefully, an answer. Now, that answer can vary quite considerably to, we know what's effective and it's very solid, to, well, we're still not quite sure yet, we need a little bit more, or sometimes there's no evidence at all to answer this, we need some primary work. So the answer can sometimes feel unsatisfactory, but it will be an answer that then drives the next stage, perhaps more primary work, whatever. But that's what a systematic review does. It's about pulling together all of the literature on a particular topic that might answer the question, sifting through that to see what the answer might be. Thank you. So what it is, systematic review is defined in a variety of ways, and the Cochrane Library is one organisation that does highly robust and gold standard systematic reviews. The Epicenter, the Campbell Collaboration all produce systematic reviews, and they've got varying definitions because, of course, everybody's got a slightly different definition, but the general principle is that a systematic review will find or identify all of the information that will answer a particular question. It will appraise it so that it will identify material of the appropriate level of quality, because not every research article is made the same. Some are stronger evidence than others. It will synthesize all of that into be able to compare apples and oranges. It will do work to try and make sure that the results are comparable, so that in a way that minimizes bias or chance of risk, you can come up with an answer. And this is all documented in a way that is transparent, it's explicit, and that it could be reproduced just like any other primary piece of work. If there's research that shows that there's a process for cloning a dog, You want to be able to follow that particular research in a very explicit way. You want to know exactly how it's done so it can be reproducible. Create a drug, will that drug work as effectively for one patient as the next? It needs to be explicit. The same with systematic reviews. Explicit method is really, really important. Thank you. None of it means that there's a quick process. To be able to define the question and work out a way to find every bit of information that could answer that question does not mean fast. Sifting through and selecting the papers to identify that it should be included is not necessarily a fast process. Reading them thoroughly to appraise them of their quality and to pull out the data to compare doesn't mean fast. So they can be quite a long process. Weeks, months and years rather than days and weeks. Okay, thank you. So the key feature of a systematic review is that it's specific, it answers a clear question, it's transparent in that every step is described in advance in a protocol, and it's described, the method is very, very explicit, transparent, robust, reproducible in the strongest sense of the word. And it's comprehensive. It does its best to capture every paper that might answer that particular question, because it's really important. Just because it's not a journal that is read regularly doesn't mean to say that it couldn't be very, very important evidence that should feed into the answer. So the point is to try and turn over every stone to find all of the papers that are relevant to answer this particular question. Thank you. So there are different sorts of reviews out there. Literature reviews are done for 100 different reasons by people at different stages in their undergraduate and academic careers. But traditional literature reviews are generally a little bit lighter touch. They're one person, they're just however much information might be findable in a convenient way. There's only one person selecting, there's only one person data extracting. So the possibility of inconsistency, the possibility of error or bias is really quite strong. So they're generally more about, this is the stuff that we want to use to demonstrate the need for the next stage. A systematic review as an output in its own right is incredibly robust. It is valid as a piece of publishable research in its own right. It should be the basis for the next step, because it says this is everything. This is everything that's out there, and it's robust and it's valid and it's transparent. So this is a good reason for justifying the next step in primary research, or the next step to get the grant or whatever. Thank you. The people that are involved in the reviews, the researchers, obviously, that's perhaps the most obvious thing. They're the academics, the medical professionals, the health professionals. They're thinking about what question is going to be useful. They're thinking about the design. They're thinking about which papers should be included. They're involved in the synthesizing, and they're writing up and the dissemination of the findings, the sharing with others, so that, again, other academics or health professionals don't have to read 50 papers, they can just read one. So the dissemination is really, really important, whether that's in publication, whether that's through conference or in other ways. So the researchers are obviously a fundamental group who are involved in reviews. Thank you. Statisticians can be really, really important as well, as bringing a skill set to be able to analyze the data and compare results, to compare those apples and oranges, to make sure that you've got robust findings, particularly and obviously for quantitative synthesis, so dealing with numbers and crunching the numbers. And they obviously contribute into the study design as well, because you need to think about these things in advance. A priori is a fundamental aspect. Making your decisions, setting your criteria in advance of actually doing the work, so you're not being influenced and trying to squeeze things at the end. So statisticians are involved as well. Veronica and I, as librarians, are involved as well in a very significant way. We contribute to the study design to make sure that the systematic review is the appropriate way of going forward. We help turn the research question into a search strategy and run those searches in various databases to be able to identify the searches. So we don't identify the articles. So we're trying to maximize the sensitivity of these searches so that they can find everything that might possibly be relevant. We search the databases. We often source the papers for researchers as well to get, so that they can get hold of the PDF, and we can contribute to the write-up as well. So librarians can be a really strong contributor to the review. And significantly and importantly, you as the people with condition, people who are expert in the area because of your lived experience, public contributors can be involved as well, and increasingly are, because if the question doesn't answer something that's meaningful and important for you as the people with a condition or with that lived experience, then what's the point of it? It's just finding it for knowledge's sake, great, but much more useful if the systematic review is answering a question which is meaningful for you as a patient. So contributing into the question, the study, and the planning of which question should be answered. Conceivably, you could be involved in screening the papers as well, because it's a thing that can be learned. It doesn't need expert and research expertise, but just a knowledge and an interest. You can be involved in screening of papers as well if you're involved in the team in that way. And for disseminating the findings, you being aware of what research has been carried out on you, with you, for you, by you, all the rest of it, being involved in disseminating those findings to other patients in the same way, perhaps through forums or expert patient groups, being involved in disseminating the findings could be really important as well. So you could make a really strong contribution without being an academic or a health professional, by being a patient with that lived experience, by being somebody with expertise in that way. Thank you. Now, the stage of a review, it looks like a very nice, clean, straight line, doesn't it? Definitely not. Definitely not as straightforward as it looks here. Developing the research question and developing the protocol, there can be a really messy, fuzzy, backwards and forwards, iterative, oh goodness, we can't answer this, it's too big, or there's not enough information, it's too small a question. That process can take quite a long time as the research question is refined and improved and clarified over time, and with the expertise and with the input from the various people mentioned previously. So developing a research question can seem like the first and most obvious thing, and it absolutely is, but it can take a surprisingly long time to get a research question that is an important one, an answerable one, a relevant one, a meaningful one, and a novel and important one too. So that developing that question can take a little bit of time. And then developing the protocol to decide the shape and form and all of these a priori decisions. I mentioned that phrase before, making sure that the plan is clear, the method is clear, you've made all your decisions before you even start, because you don't want to get to the point of synthesizing evidence and say, oh, well, we don't have enough evidence to show a 5% difference, so let's see if we can squeeze it a little harder to see if we can get a 1% difference. That's not good method. That's not a robust piece of work. So developing the protocol early and having all your criteria and outcomes and measures and processes clearly established before you start makes it a more robust piece of work. Once all of that has been clarified and refined, and then it means that the next stage, while it may take a long time, is a much clearer process, because you've thought ahead and you've made all your decisions, and you've anticipated all the pitfalls, you've anticipated all the challenges and all the processes that you will need to go through. And then it's full steam ahead with however many people are involved in the work itself. So developing the search, screening the results to make your selection of the individual papers, looking at those individual papers and doing some data extraction, then reading the papers to establish whether the evidence is strong enough, whether there's any bias in the work that was taking place. That's the critical appraisal. So there's very poor quality work that's published as well as very high quality work, and you want to recognize the difference and trade them off against each other. Data extraction, synthesize it all so that you've completed that, comparing apples and oranges, and then writing it all up and disseminating and submitting it for publication. So that is the stages of a review. Not fast. Some stages take longer than others, and some stages take much more thought process and intellectual work as well, and need a lot more input, because it's a case of, well, what's the point of asking this question? Who's it going to be useful for? But that's the sort of the timeline of any review, with no dates or amount of time required for each of it. And it's not a case of this is a nice tidy 6-month process. Every review will be different according to the complexity, the volume of information that's on there, available on a particular topic, and so on. So I hope that's given us sort of an insight into the basics and the backgrounds of a review. I'm going to pass to Veronica now. Thank you very much.
Right, so I'll just unmute myself and then move on to the next slide. So Isla's given you a really good overview of the sort of process of conducting a systematic review, why we might do a systematic review, who's involved with a systematic review, and we've got some good questions already coming through about what librarian involvement looks like in more detail, which we will answer at the end with some examples. But we never like just talking and filling the whole time on our own. So we're actually going to give you a bit of hands-on practice in what's involved in some of the steps of putting together a systematic review. So we have an activity for you, and I will explain it to you over the course of the next couple of slides. But what we're wanting you to do is help us to plan a search for a sort of hypothetical systematic review. How would you search for the articles that contain the data that we might need to answer this particular research question? So we've got a scenario. Imagine that you are contributing to a review on the effectiveness of mealtime interventions. So what we mean by mealtime interventions is the types of food that people might be eating, the environment in which they might be eating. So what we want to know is the effectiveness of these interventions on nutritional outcomes. So food intake, how much food people are eating at meal times. Health, so the overall health as a result of their food, and the overall quality of life for the elderly living in residential care. So we're not going to ask you to think of search terms for all of the components of this question. We're going to ask you to pull out one segment. So we want words for our mealtime component of the search. Food, mealtimes. So have a bit of a think. How many words can you think of for different types of food, different types of mealtimes, things that might be relevant when searching for articles on this particular topic? And the reason why we need to come up with as many words as possible is that when we're searching for systematic reviews, the places that we search, the databases and the other information sources, they don't magically know what we're looking for. They will only retrieve articles that use the exact word that you've put in. So to make sure we're not missing articles where one author, I don't know, talks about toast and another author talks about soup, we need to incorporate both of those different words in the search. So have a bit of a think and list in the chat how many words that you can think of for food or for meal times that might help us retrieve relevant articles on this topic. Thanks very much, Ashwini. You've already started us off with some suggestions. So we're looking at meal times in particular, words relating to meal. Oh, and someone has sent one to me as a direct message, so I am just going to write them in the chat as well so that everyone can see them. Really excellent suggestions, fantastic lists of words coming up. I'll give you a few more minutes, but there are some great words coming through. Really left field kinds of things that people are thinking of, but this is what we need in a systematic review, just to capture that one author who, instead of using words for breakfast, lunch and dinner, might have mentioned liquid diet instead. Excellent suggestions coming through. I almost don't want to stop you because there are so many. They're great suggestions.
I'm personally loving the Scooby snack.
Yes. Oh, 11s is amazing. Really fantastic words. I'll leave it another couple of seconds, but I think oh wow, even more coming through. This is just absolutely brilliant. We should involve you in all of our systematic reviews. We would get much better search terms than the ones we can come up with on our own. Absolutely fantastic. I'm going to let these gin. Gin is a meal, I suppose. Amazing, amazing. I'm going to let you keep listing suggestions, but I'm conscious of time. I don't want this to just be sort of me talking through a blank to a blank box while the recording runs through. But keep those suggestions coming. All of them would be excellent for this particular topic. So you can see here that just with one segment of this question, we've sort of, it's probably approaching sort of 50 different words that relate to types of food, eating, that kind of thing. And, you know, obviously there are 3 or 4 other component parts of this question that we would need to search for. So part of the sort of planning stages of a systematic review that Isla talked about is making sure that these words are right, that they're finding the right kinds of articles, that we've thought of every possible word that a researcher or someone else might use to describe their topic, to make sure that we're finding everything relevant and not missing anything. So these are some words that we came up with when we were planning the slides. And you can probably see just by looking at it that between you in the chat, you've listed many, many, many more things than we came up with. One thing that you'll notice is that we've been putting things like singulars and plurals, different like past and present tense of eating related verbs and things like that. And this is again because the database is not going to search for the word eating if we've only typed the word eat. There are some ways around it, but basically you need to kind of put almost every iteration of a word, not just meal. You have to put meals, mealtime, mealtimes, breakfast, breakfasts, breakfasting, all these kinds of things. And I wonder also, would we need to search for specific types of food? Again, think back to how authors might describe their articles. Some authors might not sort of write a sentence or so saying, you know, that the patients that they were looking at ate breakfast, but instead they might say, we were researching whether like eating soup was more effective than eating a 4-course dinner or something like that. So they might talk about specific food types. So sometimes it's a matter of getting very general words, very broad words, you know, breakfast, tea, lunch, dinner, things like that. And also very specific types of food as well. And this goes for other contexts as well, not just food, obviously. So this is what we could come up with. You can see in the chat what you managed to come up with in your own time as well. This is the set of search terms for an actual genuine systematic review on this topic. So you can see on the left-hand side of the screen, the title and the bibliographic details about this article. It's a systematic review on effectiveness of mealtime interventions on nutritional outcomes for the elderly living in residential care. And the list of words that you can see on the right-hand side of the screen with numbers next to them are the actual words that these researchers put in. And I'm actually going to answer the question in the chat just now. Why can't the database search for these longer versions of the word, even when the most basic of word searches usually can? Part of the problem for this is that things like Google try to anticipate what they think that you want when you're searching. Databases are designed to search for the exact words that you put in so that different people can replicate the same search. 2 different people on 2 different computers searching the same word in Google may get different results. 2 different people on these specialist academic databases who search for the word on 2 different computers should get exactly the same list of articles in exactly the same order. So for transparency and for reproducibility, it's really important that we know exactly what we're going to get out based on what words we put in, with no kind of, you know, the database trying to anticipate what we want. We want to know exactly what kind of comes out. One way that we can, as Isla said in the chat, force the database to search for these simultaneous words is actually demonstrated in line 1 on this search. So you might be able to see that the author has written the word meal with a little asterisk next to it. This is a way of called truncation searching. And basically what it means is that instead of just searching for the word meal, the database will search for meal, but also any words that are attached after that last letter. So meal, mealtime, meals, mealtimes, things like that. And similar things are going on in line 10, where it says dinner, dinners, lunch, lunches, snack, snacking, snacked, snacks, and so on. So you can do some of these words simultaneously, but it's a little bit more control than just, typing in the word and getting, unlimited number of related words coming back. It's those letters and then any other letters that are attached there. So this is what these researchers came up with. So they have some words for meal, but they also have words like malnutrition, feeding, environment, ambience, that kind of thing. And they've got a little bit of additional code next to the words, which is basically telling the database to search for these words just in the title and abstract, rather than in, the name of the journal or the name of the author or the place of publication. So there's different bits of publication information that the database can search in, but we want them just in the title and abstract. So that's what's going on there. So they've got a long list of words that they put together. And at the very last line, they have combined them with the word or. And what the word or is doing is saying, give us articles that have at least one of these words in them, but it doesn't have to be all of them. It could be any one of them. It could be all 16 of them. But as long as at least one of the words in that list is present, the database will find it. So that's giving us all the words to do with meals, eating, nutritional kind of related things. And the actual full search then has a similar set of words for the patient population. So these are elderly patients, people in residential care. So elderly patients, that's our search terms from line 18 to 32. And then we want to make sure that it's focused on elderly people who are living in residential care rather than living in their homes. So again, there's a bunch of search terms related to that. And those 3 collections of words are put together so that we have at least one word from each group. And sometimes it's a matter of kind of thinking of how different authors might describe things, various terminology that may have fallen out of use. Sometimes medical terminology changes, and we have to account for older terminology for older publications to make sure that they're coming through. There's a whole lot of planning that goes into getting these kinds of search terms put together. But the idea is that with a search like this, you're going to find the majority of relevant articles that have relevant information to help answer this particular research question. So it's a pretty, sometimes quite convoluted process. It's not just a matter of going into the database and saying, is there an effect, like just asking it a question, is there an effect on nutrition in care homes based on, differences in the mealtime? You have to actually search for the search terms. So the first step is doing this kind of searching. This usually results in a very large number of articles being found, typically hundreds, thousands. I've been involved in systematic reviews where it's been tens of thousands of articles that have been found. This doesn't mean that the authors read all these 10,000 articles, take information from all of them and include all of them in their summary, in their final systematic review. There is a step called screening where the researchers look through first the titles and abstracts and then sometimes the full text of the article as well to work out if the article is going to be relevant to answering that particular research question. Because when you cast your net very wide, like we have been doing with all these hundreds of search terms, you do pull in a lot of irrelevant articles as well as the ones that are going to be useful. So we have to find some way of screening them. And that's what our second activity is going to be. We're not going to ask you to read a full article right now in the class. What we are going to ask you to do is have a look at the title and abstract that you can see hopefully on the right-hand side of the screen. So imagine that you are contributing to this hypothetical review on the effectiveness of mealtime interventions on nutritional outcomes for the elderly living in residential care. Have a look at what the text says there in the title and abstract. Sometimes just the title is enough. And I'm going to launch a Zoom poll, which your vote will be anonymous. And basically what you're going to vote for is whether you would include this article in this systematic review, yes, no, or whether you need more information. So let me launch that poll just now. Hopefully you can see it here. So give a vote. Got 5 out of 5 voting to include it so far. Let's see what everybody else thinks. Pretty unanimous at the moment. Give everybody a little bit longer to have a think. Nearly everyone there. I'll give it just a final 10-15 seconds. But it's a pretty unanimous choice here. Right, I will leave things there. And as you can see, in this case, it was an absolutely unanimous vote for including this article in the review. So everyone who voted decided that it was relevant. This is actually basically the process that researchers use when getting to the screening stage in their systematic reviews. They look at the title and the abstract. They have certain criteria that they're going to apply. So, you know, things to do with, you know, are the people or the patients being studied in this review similar to the patients that we're wanting to focus on in our systematic review topic? The interventions, so they might be things like the kind of medication being researched, the kind of surgery being researched, the kind of like very broad scale healthcare policy that the article is researching, or in the case of our example question, you know, the food related intervention, does it match our research question? Are the outcomes being measured similar to the outcomes that we're interested in? You know, so they'll have these kind of predefined criteria. They'll look at the title and abstract and apply those criteria. And if it meets the criteria, they'll include it. If it doesn't meet, you know, just 1 out of 5 criteria, they will exclude it. And if they can't tell from the title and the abstract, they will move it to a kind of need more information group, read the article in full, and then apply the same questions there. And it's nice that we had a variety of people voting here, because that's how it works in a systematic review as well. It's never just one researcher who's making the decision about whether an article should be or shouldn't be included in the final review. That might come down then to one person's bias. So best practice is to have a minimum of 2 separate researchers screening all these titles and abstracts, and they do it separately. They don't compare with each other what they're doing until they're finished. That way, you know, maybe one researcher might be more senior than the other, and, you know, you don't want a situation where the more senior person is sort of bossing the other person around and saying, well, you have to agree with me and include this article and not include that one. So they do it separately. That way it minimizes bias, and any articles that they disagree on, preferably a 3rd researcher is brought in to kind of vote on that. So it's never just one person's decision, and it follows this kind of structured process for inclusion and exclusion. And as we mentioned earlier in this presentation, this is one area where patient and public involvement could be really, really useful, because assessing for relevance shouldn't just be, down to the researchers. The people who are experts in their own experience, who have expert and personal knowledge of what it's like to live with a particular disease or condition, or experience a particular form of healthcare treatment, or who may do so in the future, also obviously have really valid insights here in terms of whether something is relevant and whether something's going to be useful from a patient perspective. So I'll stop sharing the results of the poll and we'll move things on. So we've got some examples of where PPI is already involved in systematic reviews. So one of the big projects that's been ongoing for some years now is Cochrane Crowd. So this is an initiative from the Cochrane Library, which I think has already been linked in the chat. So this is an organization that does systematic reviews and other forms of evidence synthesis, large-scale evidence synthesis like this. And one of the sort of initiatives that they developed was this Cochrane Crowd, where they crowdsource help from the general public in categorizing the big list of randomized controlled trials that they have in their database. So it's basically they train people up about what a randomized controlled trial involves, and then they work through this list of uncategorized publications and basically indexing whether they are a randomized controlled trial and what they're about and that kind of thing. Discovery is an organization that is a bit closer to home, and basically this is an initiative that enables public contributors in healthcare research, particularly for systematic reviews. And Cochrane Involving People is another similar initiative, again soliciting the involvement of public contributors in systematic reviews. So is it worth it having this PPI contribution to systematic reviews? We feel that it's a really worthwhile contribution at basically every single stage of the review. Getting the involvement of patients and the public at the planning stages means that hopefully the researchers are trying to research a more relevant question that is patient-centered. So it's not just, is this medication effective, but also what effect this might have on someone's quality of life, for example. It will help when planning the search strategy, so that search terms look for outcomes that are meaningful to patients. Hopefully I've given some examples of how screening, having a large number of people involved, more hands makes light work, working through these very large volumes of papers to screen for relevance. The more people involved, the quicker the process will be, and the less biased it will be if we've got more, a variety of people involved from a variety of backgrounds. When we're at the evaluation stage, so evaluating whether an article that's been included is good quality, if it's got robust findings, and if it's relevant for answering this question, including the patient perspective, obviously will make this evaluation richer with more detail and more relevant to the final conclusions. Then when kind of summarizing all the papers, we feel that the patient perspective means that, as well as just answering, is this particular treatment effective, we want to know, will it make a difference in people's lives? And having that patient perspective will help to answer that question. And then when it comes to dissemination, biggest input would be things like making sure that there's a plain English summary of the findings to ensure sort of that that it can be disseminated as widely as possible, to be accessible for people that aren't just specialist researchers. And also I would argue that patient and public involvement, it's not just going to be the actual content of the dissemination. It might be where people choose to disseminate it. How many regular members of the general public are sort of sitting down and reading a lot of specialist journal articles published in journals? Often they're locked behind paywalls. You need university logins to access them. And often the language and the way that the findings are presented are not necessarily accessible to people outside of academia. But having patient and public involvement can mean that things are disseminated in plain language and in a variety of platforms, places that the public are more likely to read them and see them. And maybe you can think of other areas in which patient and public involvement would be relevant in systematic reviews. If you can think of them, please feel free to list them in the chat. We'd really be interested to hear what you think here. And that's basically it in terms of our presentation. We've been really appreciating the questions that have been coming in through the chat. I know Isla's been answering a lot of them as the presentation has gone on. And I know that there was at least one question that I promised we would answer at the end. So I'm going to do that after the recording has been paused. And now basically this is your chance to ask us any questions that didn't get answered over the course of our presentation.